A warm welcome to everyone listening either here on the Zoom webinar or via the Facebook live stream. Thank you very much having two heavyweights today here opening this academic day of our conference, of our Microenergy Systems Conference in honor of Bangladesh's 50th anniversary of independence. And I was told that I have to underline that Daniel Kammen and his team submitted the first paper for the EAP journal, which is of course one of our prime goals of this conference, especially this research day, that we have good scientific output. I'll give a very brief introduction because our speakers hardly need any. First of all, we have Dr. Dan, but for disclosure maybe, so Bernd Möller has been my PhD supervisor, and Dan Kammen has been one of my co-supervisors. So I have to be very careful today. So I'll do my best. So Dr. Kammen is the class of 1935 Distinguished Professor of Energy at UC Berkeley. He has a range of engagements, commitments, board seats, which I will not all read out here. To us in the off-grid world, he is probably best known as the main researcher who is pushing forward the field, who is supporting us entrepreneurs. So he's really, really, really famous in this sector. And talking about famous, he also has a lot of foresight because he actually has already kind of impeached former President Trump in August 2017 through his famous letter of resignation, which was on the Washington Post, which had the acronym of impeach at every paragraph starting with I am and so forth. So unfortunately, it took a little bit longer and it wasn't a impeachment, but I think we're all in a better place now. Dan will give the keynote here, and then Bernd Möller will be the key discussant. Professor Dr. Bernd Möller is here, especially in Bangladesh, also quite well known because he leads the program at Flensburg University on energy and environmental management for developing countries. And a lot of Bangladeshi students are interested in that, are applying there, are in that PhD program or in that master program. So there are very strong links, but not only to Bangladesh, also to the rest here of the South Asian continent. So with that short introduction, I'll pass over to Dr. Kammen so that you can start your elaborations.
Well, Sebastian, thanks so much for doing that. Thanks for having me, and Bernd, thanks for giving the comments. And I think most importantly, I'm really appreciative of all the participants. I read through much of the conference sessions, and I have to say it's a little bit intimidating because academic often means not so useful. And what I saw in the first few days is people who are really getting things done. So I hope I can add a little bit. I will share my screen and show some slides, but I have to say, I really think that you organized this well because the first few days look truly exciting in terms of the types of things you covered. And so I am a physicist, and so I'm always a little intimidated to talk to people who are really getting things done because we often do quite a bit of theory, a lot of analytic modeling, but not so much hardware. And so today I'm going to try to reverse that. And I'll try to talk not so much about the material science for energy storage and some of the cool technologies that we are working on, but some more policy and team learning approaches that I think have been at least helpful for the work we're doing, in particular with Minigrid projects in East Africa and in Southeast Asia. So I'm looking forward to sort of listening to some of the comments, and I'll really just jump in and show just a couple of the types of things that we're doing to try to really build new business models for really low-income people and communities. So again, anything that I show here today, you can find versions on my website, which is the renewable and Appropriate Energy Laboratory, or rail.berkeley.edu. And then for those of you who use Twitter, we generally tweet once or twice a day from the laboratory, but we use my own name just to kind of connect. So if you're interested, feel free to comment and go back and forth from there. So I'll talk about three things. I'll try to do them fairly briefly so we have time to talk. One of them is what I would say is kind of a more standard technology play. It's a project we have with a Italian-American company called Off-Grid Box, which is mainly working in East Africa. And then I'll talk about a thing which we're really quite proud of, and that is a program to develop essentially a new currency, a new innovative financial model called a PREC, a Peace Renewable Energy Credit. And we've had some nice successes recently. And then I'll end up with the title of the talk that you had, and that is the idea that we could actually make a franchise model for mini grids. And that really means an opportunity for small businesses, for homeowners, for cooperatives to find a way to install these systems at a financial benefit right off the bat, very much the way we have in the United States and you have in Germany, to essentially profit from installing technologies. And that's not normally how we do it for the so-called bottom of the pyramid for low-income groups. But we think both the PREC program and then these mini grid or microgrid franchises might be interesting ways to do both of those. So just to kind of frame a little bit on the more broadly, my laboratory, as Sebastian said, does work on a range of mini grid installations. We do a number of analytic design work using both our own in-laboratory software tools, and we try to also replicate everything we do in the commercially available tools using things like the Homer software from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, so that people can download commercial versions to do design work and checking. One of the biggest challenges that I had seen until recently, and this probably shows more how old I am than what the students and practitioners in the room will see, and that is, for a long time, the top international societies were really not interested in off-grid energy and microfinance and all the things that I saw everyone in the conference was talking the last few days. And so one of the ways that we tried to break that down was that, along with two colleagues, Jatin Nathwani and Claudio Canizares at Waterloo University in Canada, we worked for almost 2 years to convince the IEEE, the Institute of Electrical Engineers, to commission a special issue just on mini grids. And I have to say, getting the largest technical society in the world, and I didn't know that when I started, the only larger societies are in medicine, but in this electrical engineering community, getting them to agree to do a special issue devoted only to off-grid energy access was much harder than the research. We were successful in the end, and so September 2019, the special issue came out. All the papers are open access, and we looked at mini grid projects from Alaska to Myanmar to Kenya to Australian outer islands to Indonesia. And so if you're interested, I urge you to do a search for it. It's a useful starting ground in this process. And one of the project areas that I found most interesting in kind of getting mini grid developers from all over the world to talk about their projects, as we did in the special issue, was, while solar plus energy storage gets so much of the attention, one of the really interesting things was to find technical opportunities where groups were really doing things very differently. So in a paper in the same year in Nature, a number of us worked with mini grid developers around the world who were doing really unconventional projects. So this is a micro hydro run-of-the-river system in Laos on the Namu River. And it's a project that has been powering not only the community's basic needs, but a growing network of villages that are connected. And so they're connected through a number of different opportunities. In one case, it's providing cold storage for fish they catch in the river, but it's also been a source of Wi-Fi overlap. So this is actually an area quite deep in the forest where you can have Wi-Fi when you walk between villages. And that ends up not only being interesting socially, but because this community is actually targeted to be removed because of a large dam that has been proposed to be built on their land right here upriver, and all of the power from this dam would be exported to China. And so it's an interesting example of the mini grids provided economic base and a means to coordinate and organize. And they've been doing civil disobedience and blocking the roads now for almost a year and a half to keep the developers out. The well-funded hand of China is really a problem in this area for them. And what you can see here in the graphic is for each of the dams that have already been constructed, there are dark circles. All of the proposed new dams, almost all of them, to export power to China, and in some cases to power that go to Vietnam, are in white circles. And so one of the things that we've tried to work very hard on is finding the opportunities to demonstrate that local control of resources will not only power the communities, but will also provide economic opportunity at the national scale. And Laos and now Myanmar are essentially in a huge series of debates about how much export energy they want to do versus meeting domestic needs. And so again, this paper in Nature tried to develop a methodology to not only empower the communities, but also to allow the national government to see the value of preserving rivers, not just sort of flooding reservoir after reservoir to feed international partners. So it gave me kind of a lot of interesting background in what we could do if we really team up. So the projects that I'll highlight today weren't done by my laboratory alone. In fact, managing the very diverse set of partners has been, I think, the bigger challenge than anything else. And so in all of the projects I'll talk about now, all of these players are involved in one or more of the projects. I'll focus a little bit on Nurus, which is a local mini-grid developer in the Congo, and Energy Peace Partners, which is a company that spun out of my laboratory, and then Congo Power, Resolve, and Google, which are essentially all the same thing. This is a partnership Google funds to try to install mini grids in conflict areas in East and Central Africa, specifically to empower women's groups so that they can do better mining. And the Better Mining Association is one designed to try to turn the exploitation of the materials in all of our cell phones and things away from conflict materials, the tungsten, manganese, cobalt, etc., but to put that under the control of community groups, and in particular women's groups, so that we can really turn the corner on the exploitation of the technologies. But I'll start with Off-Grid Box, again, this Italian-American consortium. So my team within the laboratory is just kind of a remarkable set of graduate students from Hillary U, who now lives in the Congo to gather data on not only the community mini-grids, but as you might have seen, the killing just 2 weeks ago of the Italian ambassador. And actually, she was on the last military flight out of Goma, the big city on the East Coast, as the country closed down for COVID. Sam Miles, another PhD student, has spent 9 years working on mini-grid concessions in Francophone West Africa. Jocelyn Mariale is our newest PhD student. She's from Tanzania and has been working on business partnerships for community mini-grids. Serena Patel is one of my undergraduates who will be starting graduate school somewhere, I hope, in the fall. And then Alyssa Newman is both a member of my laboratory, but also the manager at Google of their sustainable materials program. So between this large group and then our team inside, it's really an interesting, diverse mix. So I won't go through the story that you all know. This is from a paper we wrote more than 5 years ago now, just trying to highlight that while global population has risen and the on-grid population has risen, and there's some modest success at closing the access gap, we still do not have consistent ideas about when to fill this gap, the delta between the red lines. We should be thinking about expanding traditional grids, purple, building mini grids in blue, and then developing household level solutions in whatever color that is, sand or tan or something at the bottom. And so really thinking through strategies that make sense for different communities is one of the big challenges. And I guess I'm still surprised that we don't have better typologies. Those of you who heard Sebastian talk about the SOLShare program have seen some clear ways to aggregate, but we consistently battle with the big agencies about when should we be making the large grid more accessible, more democratic versus really breaking off for the mini grids, and mini grids that are independent or mini grids that can interact with the big grid. And so there are some very basic questions not solved, and the proliferation of exciting hardware technologies has not solved them. It's actually given each group more ammunition to do what they think is right, which is maybe a good learning process, but it doesn't send very clear messages for where we need funding, where we need innovation. And we've done lots of work, and in this paper we highlighted the costs for different solutions, be it pico power, meaning technologies within the house, to solar home systems, to mini grids, microgrids, and then the large scale grids. And we've tried to highlight what the costs are and what the data is from systems like those micro hydro I showed you in Laos and in Bhutan. Some data we actually got from Sebastian on solar home systems in Bangladesh, and then some of these small scale solutions in Kenya, all of which we try to kind of think through about energy demand, reliability, empowerment of disenfranchised individuals and communities. And we have great individual stories, but I would say we have not gotten to a point where there is kind of a better understanding of which systems to emphasize in which settings. And that's something we need to work on as we move ahead. So we try to use the kind of a diverse set of metrics from the World Bank's series of tiers to trying to make the case and the linkages between not just energy, but for example, how do we use that to enable income generating projects, to highlighting the gender issues, kind of the standard mix. And one of the things which I do feel we need more academic work on is trying to find a way to look at more than one of these things at the same time. I don't just mean saying a mini grid supports many of these things, trying to put a valuation on it, whether it's through a social cost of carbon, or whether it's from the more economic perspective of thinking through some of the so-called impossibility theorems, meaning it's very hard to develop metrics that equally value these things that go beyond simple monetary ones, which we know undervalue good health, gender issues, all kinds of things don't get picked up. So we've been trying to find those methods, but again, this has not been an easy process for the field. So the first project, and I'll talk about the projects sort of a little bit briefly so we can have more time for conversation. This is a project with this company Off-Grid Box, and here you can see one of their boxes set up. It is a fully palletized solution. So the solar panels, of course, come packed in the box. The solar water heating system comes packed in the box. Inside, you'll see when I flip it around, there's technology to do water purification. We have testing equipment built in, Wi-Fi, solar charging stations, etc., all built in. And you can put 6 of these onto a standard large size pallet. So you can deploy in some really remote situations. And so again, these are typically fairly small systems, 200, 300 watts per panel, 12 panels. You got to get 3, or the bigger ones are 5 or 8 kilowatt systems, giving you kind of a reasonable but not overwhelming amount of power. And what we've been working on is the distribution networks for things like this, so that we can get charging of devices, we can get a Wi-Fi center in town, a fresh water center, and really help to try to nucleate businesses that might form up around that kind of power hub. And so This has been an interesting project. Here's the front view of one of them. There's the water purification tank, a lot of the hardware in there to do charge controlling and to give flexibility so that if we go from the wet season to the dry season, we can change the mixture of providing power for productive uses, high current uses, or more for water desal in the dry season. And so again, trying to give you a flexible technology base. And again, that mixture is kind of packing a lot into one of these, but in terms of being able to deal with diverse water conditions, not only locationally, but during different times of the year. In particular, some of the marginal areas, such as in the northern parts of South Sudan or Western Kenya, or some of the arid areas that we work in, really having that flexibility requires more plumbing and hardware, but has been one of the selling points. And again, you can see the solar panels on top, they all come packed inside the one box, and there's the tanks, et cetera. So there's nothing unique or special about the hardware in this system. What I think is most interesting about it is that we are designing this so that you do a bunch of these at once. And so again, the system costs about $25,000. And for the 25 of these we've installed so far, we found that from their manufacturing hub in Italy to the field costs about another 25. So 100% tariff, if you will, in terms of the logistics of getting this all into place for remote location. So here's one coming across Lake Tanganyika by a small dhow. And then here's it installed. That's the picture I showed you before in the center of kind of a village square. And so it's been an interesting start. In Rwanda, we've done a bit of tracking, and the feature about this system that I found most useful is that the boxes are all standardized. They come in 3, 5, or 8 kilowatt sizes, so they're small. Here's the network of them that are installed right now in Rwanda, and because each one is the same, we've actually been able to do a little more consistent methodological kind of economics, regression analysis, to look at the different services and how they play out in different communities. And for each one of these, we're doing lots of GIS work to look at how much economic activity there was around in the town square before it arrived and after it arrived. And so I have a student right now who is actually breaking Berkeley protocol for COVID. She just couldn't wait any longer. She's in Huye right now studying the box that was installed 2 years ago. And we're doing a lot of this kind of consistent comparison back and forth. And for those who worked in East Africa, this is the notable line. Rubavu is a kind of a beach resort town in Rwanda, but just a kilometer away across the border in the Democratic Republic of Congo is one of the most complex war-torn towns. And in fact, the assassination 2 weeks ago of the Italian ambassador happened right at this bend in the road. And this is about the safest road I ever travel on in the Congo. I go up and down here all the time, from Goma to right up here, which is the park headquarters of Virunga National Park, the oldest national park in Africa. And so I'll highlight what happened right here in terms of learning about these mini grids in the next slide. So map of Rwanda, we chart where the mini grids are. We use satellite observations to look at lights are in the towns, both before we install a box and afterwards, as a way to get data on what's going on. My student who's in Huye right now, again, she's basically living in one of these buildings along the town square and is watching what businesses take advantage, what businesses co-locate so they can take advantage of the Wi-Fi and the water availability to kind of build back in areas that have seen violence recently. Part of that story is trying to figure out what mixture of technologies that fits under the energy budget of one of these systems are of most interest. And so we have people advocating for basic services, refrigeration technologies, others arguing we need technologies in place that allow one to do larger scale commercial activities, from flour milling to husking. And all of these are all technologies that were shipped with the boxes at the request of the communities. And so it's an interesting range of different end uses put in place where we have these very similar boxes in operation. And so those projects are kind of progressing. We've installed 20 of these off-grid boxes so far. We expect to do another 20 or 25 in the next 2 years, pending easier travel with COVID. We actually have 2 pallets that are waiting on the dock in southern Italy to be sent. And so we're hoping that will be sent in a week or 2 and they'll arrive sometime in the spring. And then if COVID restrictions are lifted, we'll be installing quite a bit more. Although there's not a lot of COVID restrictions in place now in Rwanda. It's mainly on the export side in Italy. Well, I mentioned one thing that actually was quite interesting. If I go back to the map for a second, one of our boxes is in Rubavu, in this kind of affluent resort town. It's right on the lake. But people in Goma started to come over and take a look at it. And so what we found out was that there was really a lot of interest in getting these into some of the most war-torn areas. And so here is something which was not a planned project. It came out of a really interesting back and forth of people coming over from the Congo. And they requested that we do installations at the ranger centers on the edge of Virunga National Park. So here I am with one of the rangers. You can see the solar panel just between us. Here's the panel next to the ranger headquarters. And these are the rangers that are trying to mine the guerrillas. This is an area, though, that consistently has rebel attacks. The M23 rebel group killed 6 rangers in January and 23 rangers last summer. There's lots of poaching going on. For those of you who speak Swahili, this is showing all the different animals one should not poach. This is a woman saying, poaching these animals not only kills the animals, but kills our local economy. And so we were convinced to install some of these smaller systems there. And here's, again, charcoal's the main trade, although actually illegal logging and poaching animals is probably a larger trade. And actually the national park has been working with Goma to install power lines to take hydropower from the small rivers in the park down to Goma to provide electricity for the city. And Goma has the unfortunate distinction of being the largest funded hub for UN peacekeeping in the world. It's about $1 billion a year for energy and water infrastructure projects to try to rebuild this war-torn area. So a tough situation, but one that really asked for these kind of mini-grid solutions to take place. And again, this is as you look, this is Rubavu. Here's Goma. That's the airport. That's the airport I just showed you. And this is the road up to the park center, where again the Italian ambassador was just killed. So in this kind of setting, we needed to do more than just think about hardware solutions. So in our laboratory, 2 postdoctoral fellows and myself started to talk not so much about the hardware, but about what innovative franchise models or financing could we put together. And what we came up with was something that felt very academic 2 years ago. And that's the notion of these PRECs, these Peace Renewable Energy Credits. So this is an internationally traded commodity. It represents 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy generated. And the idea was simply to use the United Nations tracking system, or the IREC system, which they use to keep track of lots of different internationally traded credits. There's health credits that are traded. There are sustainable logging credits. And so we essentially just try to squeeze in credits for clean energy projects. And the idea is that when you install a clean energy project, for each megawatt hour of renewable energy generated, you generate a PREC credit that can be used to fund additional projects. Those PRECs are certified by us, the Energy Peace Partners Program, tracked by the United Nations, and those can then be purchased by individuals or in particular companies that want to put a financial valuation on their social responsibility. This has been quite successful. Again, we started this 2 years ago. 1 year ago, we had our first sale of PRECs that was actually sold to Microsoft. And so this 1.2 megawatt solar array in Goma, this is the town of Goma, that's the lake behind, was inaugurated just in this past November. And it was paid for by the credits. It was a successful start. It's up and running. And this is the project, but our learning curve was pretty short. We installed a smaller, a 37 kilowatt system at a relief camp in Kenya. This is at a clinic. And so these are the solar panels here. These are the clinic buildings. That was kind of our learning curve to get the United Nations. They provided the first PREC purchase. And we scaled directly from that 37 kilowatt system to this 1.2 megawatt system. And just 2 days ago, these PRECs were picked as one of the 6 innovative environmental financing mechanisms for 2021. So we're really pleased to get the recognition. That was 2 days ago. And we immediately then got a second customer in line. And this is the completely war-torn town of Malakal in South Sudan. It's up in the conflict zone near the border with Sudan. Most of the people no longer live in town. They live in a UN relief center over here. The town has essentially been emptied. And we are now sending the hardware to install a very similar 1.1 kilowatt system that will power the relief camp now, focusing on the health clinics and on refrigeration areas. But then when hopefully people move back into the town, there will then be a power plant there that can be expanded. So when the camp closes, it's only a kilometer from downtown. This is downtown Malakal, if you can call it that. And so this financing mechanism was, again, dreamed up, but what we tried to do was follow as much as possible with funding that was being made available for other things, again, health and other investments. And so didn't take a complex process, took a lot of persistence in trying to get the UN first and then business partners like Microsoft to buy those credits. Now we're hoping with this award from the development lab that we'll actually be able to kind of spread this process more. But it really kind of speaks to scaling up, and we would not have gotten here if we had ever not done the off-grid boxes, because it was by people coming to see them that we kind of moved to this larger scale. So I'll close with the third example, kind of a different setting, also in East Africa. This is a project in Kibera, the largest slum in Africa, in Nairobi. And 6 years ago, a friend of mine, actually an actress, did a movie in Kenya and wanted to give back afterwards. And so she raised the money to build a women's center. You can see it here from a kind of a sanitized front street view. It's actually the largest building in the area. Here's our drone flying overhead. You can see the solar panels on the roof. And here's the rest of the town. There's actually a railroad line. It's quite a politically sensitive railroad line. It runs from Mombasa through Nairobi, all the way to Kampala, Uganda. The Chinese are trying to increase the grade on it and steal some of this market area in front. This is a very, very active market area. You can see the surrounding areas. And so we were able to finance and build the building. It's been open since 2014. It shows the number of days active. And the town center was not thought of as an energy source. In fact, we initially just hooked into the national grid, Kenya Power and Lighting Company. But once we got the building up and running, the roof area was because it was designed to hold solar up there. That's why there's very few mechanicals. But it opened up a door to another process, another kind of innovative financing scheme. And so with the location we chose to build the building, it was actually the only flat land we could get title to, right on the edge of the market area. It's called the Kamakunji campgrounds, for anyone who's been as part of Kibera. And so in a deal with all of the merchants, we said we will not only build the center, which provides women in particular with safe places to do washing, toiletry facilities, internet training for kids. Now there's a ballet school in the building because a child from this slum actually has made it onto the International Ballet Tour. And so there's been a boom of interest of young kids in ballet. So we do ballet training as well in here. But the deal was we would find a way to build a franchise model with the community. So again, solar panels on the roof, water tanks here. We have a deep borehole we dug. We bring up water and distribute it for free to the large school that's right in the back of the building. It's called the Olympic Primary School with 4,000 students. And then merchants in the front can purchase water from us. So that was really the start of the process. So we call it Kibera Town Center. We started off by simply buying power from the utility, Kenya Power and Lighting Company. They sell us power. But once we got our photovoltaic system on the roof and our battery backup system, it kind of was a natural next step to think about, could we not only power our own needs, but could we expand that model into the community? And of course, these are very low cost roofs. They're just metal corrugated roofing, but it is roof area. And you can see there's a lot of it. And so the model that we sort of landed on without any particular cleverness was we highlighted that we were a lit up center. We had power 24 hours a day because of our solar and batteries. And we started off with lead acid batteries. They've been upgraded now to lithium ion. And here's a view down from the top of the railroad line. You can see going through here where all the trash is. Vehicles parked out front for a lot of the vendors. This is our building. And then this dirt area here is the soccer pitch for Olympic Primary School. But there's buildings adjacent to us crowded up right around the edges. So what we did was to say, why don't we make a franchise available where individual consumers, whether they're homes, there's a couple homes on the here in the end you can see, or some of the businesses. This is a business here. These are all businesses in these right along this side of the train tracks. These are businesses here, a tailor, a coffin maker, a dried fish seller. And so individual consumers can join this franchise model, and they can join it in one of three different ways. They can either simply buy power from us. We string the lines to them just in within about a half a kilometer of our rooftop, or they can say they want to still buy power from Kenya Power Company, KPLC, but they want to host solar, which they make available to us. We pay them for the use of their roof to expand our area. You can see we've filled most of our roof already. Or they can host solar and they can be a customer. So you can essentially do any combination in the prosumer chain. Just be paid by us to lease roof space, or they can be just a customer of ours, but no hosting solar, or they can kind of go all in and they can buy power from us, but they can also share in the revenues by having roof area that we then expand the solar onto. And we've now just about doubled the amount of solar from our initial 35 kilowatts to 70. We're talking now about a much larger expansion onto the school, which is behind here as well. And so this kind of very straightforward franchise model allowed us to partner with the community. There's a whole community association that assesses rooftops and looks at some homes and decides that their roof is really so dilapidated that they're probably not a good customer unless they upgrade the roof. There's been this kind of interesting dialogue back and forth in terms of building out that model. And so as I conclude, we're now talking at a different scale. So this is the Rohingya relief camps. This is Balikuhari. And so one of my students that some of you have met, Samira Siddiqui, who is from Dhaka, has been working with ICAD and others. And quite a bit of her research is on how do you equip these kinds of humanitarian crises with solar technology, kind of in the models we're talking about, but also have it packable enough so that hopefully this relief camp will not have that infinite lifetime. And unfortunately, relief camps around the world have almost a 3-decade average lifetime. So we're hoping, although certainly the most recent events in Myanmar don't speak lightly for a soon solution, but we're hoping to do scalable versions where individual clusters could form these franchise models using some of the relief funds, but really learning how to operate a mini-grid while here, and then hopefully taking this back with them as they go. And again, here's just more. And I know those of you in Bangladesh have much more direct. I've only been here once, where Samir has done several trips, but many of you are probably working on solutions. But here's just more of the kind of the setups. And I would feel bad if I ended the talk there without highlighting that we are doing exactly the same thing as well in the United States. So this is a schematic of a low income part of the city I live in, Oakland, California. It's kind of the poor sister to San Francisco. It's a bigger population than San Francisco, but gets far less attention. In fact, most of the attention that my hometown, my town, Oakland, gets is negative attention. But this is a low income community. It's very near the shipping, the docks. And in this case, working with the state of California, you can see the seal of the state of California down here. They're the sponsor of a project which we call the Eco Block. And the Eco Block is a design system where all of these rooftops are having solar installed. The installation was actually delayed until June due to COVID. We're supposed to be installing last summer, but the installation of solar here is not powering each home directly. All of these are homes with the exception of 3 stores down at the end here, and then this apartment building over here. And so this is the layout of solar that we're set to install on the rooftops. But instead of powering each home individually, what we're doing is we're pooling it. And so in this garage over here, we are installing above ground and below ground flywheels and storing all the power here, sending power back to each home, as well as powering electric vehicle hookups so that people who are not homeowners can charge their electric vehicles, and the block is purchasing several electric vehicles that will be done in a block level share. You simply plug them in, and there's a password, there's a keypad where you enter your block code, which changes pretty regularly, and you can recharge your electric vehicles. And most of the charging locations that the block has decided on are actually clustered around the apartment building, where other individual homeowners can get EVs and then either park in front or pull into their own driveways. So this system has been approved by the state. This is the first installation of the flywheel battery here. And again, we've installed this mix of, well, we're installing the mix of the solar right now. This was installed before the COVID lockdown. Again, we have partners at Berkeley, at Stanford, at the NASA Research Center. The city of Oakland's a partner, and then this block has formed a homeowners association. And so they anticipate that they will be meeting their own needs, charging three collectively owned electric vehicles, and then during the summer selling some excess power back. We don't think they're going to be buying any power even during the cloudy or the rainy season, but they won't be making any excess money then. But in the summer, they'll be selling power back. And that's when the demand for electricity is highest. And so what I've tried to do is to go through a series of projects that highlight the opportunity. And so my very last statement before I turn it over is that one other interesting thing has happened in the US, and that is that while we just went through 4 very dark years, we are now in a situation where all of the states in the US you see on the map here have either implemented in green or in blue, or are considering adopting 100% clean energy standards before mid-century. In fact, California, ours is 2045, and the assessment now is that without these kinds of community solutions, we would not make it to those targets. The good news is that California, as of today, is running at 80% renewable energy powered, And that is double the state level commitment. And the next wave of building are these microgrid and mini-grid solutions. And so I'm very pleased to see where we are. We just ended these dark days of Mr. Trump. We're much more pleased about not only these kinds of projects, these mini-grids in our own cities, but also the kind of a larger international partnership that we think having the US back in the Paris Climate Agreement will bring to these microgrid solutions. So I'm sure I've talked too long. I'll stop there and turn it over to Bernd. And again, thank you for listening. And I will then also stop doing screen share. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel, for this very inspiring talk. But let me start by saying how honored I feel to be part of this session, sitting between the two giants that Sebastian was speaking about, Daniel and Sebastian himself, right? Anyway, I also feel honored, and I want to congratulate on this occasion of the 50th anniversary of Bangladesh. It's really inspiring to work with people from Bangladesh and from all other the places in Flensburg here, where we concentrate on many aspects of the energy management of sustainable energy access for all. Because we don't have much time, I get just to the point, Daniel. Yeah, my experience is that the idea of providing renewable energy leads to two outcomes mostly. And of course, increased energy access is one, but in many cases, we also see an unintended side effect, and that is actually the increase of inequality in communities. And we see that either in the industrialized countries, where we see marginalized societies without an opportunity to invest in renewables, but that have been left with all the negative effects of visibility of wind turbines and so on. But also in many countries in the south, where rural electrification schemes have basically only improved the situation of the people who were already well off, right, and increased the gap between the poor that you originally addressed and the people that benefit from the scheme. So what are your experiences in this field, in the many interesting projects that you have presented today?
Well, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, what I have found is that, I started off in this as a physicist, but I've definitely found that now that prices have fallen, there's many more players. I mean, calling out what Sebastian's doing, I think, is a great example of really taking advantage of what the hardware can allow you to do. And for us, the hardest part of every single project has not been the design. It actually hasn't even been the financing. It's been the organization, dealing with permits. Nairobi has multiple mayors, and so you have to get permission from all of them. They're battling around the politics of, will they give China a right of way right through that critical area. And so I find that we spend 10 times more on these kind of political logistics than we do not just the hardware, but even getting financing for it. And so the stronger the community sense for a project is, the easier it is to push all of that kind of heavyweight uphill. And so I think that, that community organizing. And so I would say we need less physicists like me, and we need more sociologists and psychologists and good communicators, because that really does seem to be where things break down. I think that's really what you're getting at in terms of.
Yeah, I guess you get me two good keywords here, and one is the power of the community. How to grasp that power. We're just experiencing that with our students who are virtually in Ireland on something we call international class, working with the community. But we also see that it is difficult for the community members to see themselves as community, right? They all see, oh, we can solar on our roofs, right? How much does it cost? We can do a heat pump, we can retrofit our buildings, but there's very little sense of community. So how do you actually build communities?
I mean, I don't think there's any easy finite answer to that. I certainly think that one of the interesting aspects of renewable energy that many people thought would be, oh, okay, now every rooftop can do it. And so, you can build your own. In my home here in Oakland, I do have an electric vehicle. I do have solar. So that was kind of the idea. But actually, I found the opposite is the case, that in these communities that I showed here, renewable energy and decentralized didn't actually lead into the richest business person did it on their own. They were actually more interested to see the community raise up. And maybe it's self-interested. Maybe if the community's richer, there'll be more customers at their stalls and things. But the idea that you build a fortress around your own clean energy system, which is sort of the Western privatization model, that wasn't anywhere near as appealing as the ability to get off the unreliable and hard to deal with utility and to do it yourself. And again, that's why I think that SOLShare is attractive. That's why I think these franchise models in Nairobi are attractive. That's certainly why I think the example I showed in Laos is attractive, because the communities put more effort into Wi-Fi coverage in the jungle so they could talk to each other than they did in terms of powering up more lights in homes, because defending their homeland against big Chinese dams felt very much like the bigger criteria. I think they got it right. So I don't think there's any single solution, but I do think that renewable energy can unite more than just allow you to be kind of Elon Musk wants everyone to have an EV in the garage and solar panels on the roof and to disconnect from their neighbors. That's sort of his vision. And I would say these communities see the collective approach as more exciting.
Yeah, that's very encouraging, because that was exactly what I told to our Irish friends the other week, when I said, all the big policy changes that we've seen in Europe, in Denmark, in Germany, much of that at least has its origin in the community involvement around wind energy and solar and biomass and so on. They have been given the pace to politicians, sometimes unintentional, sometimes just by accident, but in most cases. Now, before we give some time to the questions from the audience, I would like to ask what you mentioned as a short learning curve in many of the projects, and that fits well with the rapid development and the cost decrease that we've seen with PV and with batteries and so on. Do you think this is something that could eventually outpace the structural difficulties of microgrids that microgrids have compared to classical utilities? There's no economy of scale. There's a huge increase in the cost curve when it comes to growth. And in the paper that you are presenting today on the franchise models, one of the greatest challenges is the difficulty to predict future demand, because every future increase in demand is extremely painful and expensive. And also the opposite can be painful and expensive, that there are no customers, right? So do you think that this learning curve would actually be a solution for this sort of problems?
Well, so that's why I feel like we need more, not just economists, but more social scientists, because we're going to double the number of the off-grid boxes in the next 2 years. But will we keep going down a learning curve? And by a learning curve here, I really mean one in terms of the logistics, that the government is willing to support. So I don't know the answer, but I do know, we're partnering with now a group also supported by GIZ, a German-based group that has just signed a contract in Chad. Except for the biggest cities in N'Djamena and just a few others, they've basically been given an open contract for each community they can go into. They will install a 50 to 200 kilowatt system, and theirs actually includes larger cooling stations and things. And so the president of Chad is really banking on that model will spread. And if it takes presidential patronage, if it takes the kind of partnership we had with Google to get the off-grid boxes, I'm not sure. I think this is really the challenge. When microgrids were brand new, they looked too expensive. Now I would say your question is the right one. Can we learn enough and make the process of doing more of them efficient in terms of these non-market barriers? So I don't know the answer to that one.
let's see if the audience have a few questions and more answers. Maybe I hand over back to Sebastian. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Bernd. Thank you very much, Dan, for this interesting discussion. I'm a little bit. It's a shame we are disrupting the discussion, because it's been going on really well. But it's only 5 minutes left, and we have a bunch of questions in the audience. I'll put them to you both, and you pick and choose how you want to go about it. The first question was directed on Eastern Congo and the company Nurus. Question was, how do you evaluate Nurus' business model?
Well, I mean, they could not have done it without the PREC because they needed that cash to get it built, but they've put the PREC revenues into trying to build the next one. So Nurus is successful so far, but they've only been up and running since November. And you don't have to wait, unfortunately, more than a few months for another rebel group to attack one of the small communities in that area. And so, again, hardware is not the question. When I drive that stretch of road, it's only 27 kilometers, but I go through more than 10 checkpoints. And those are each individual warlord setting up their own little domain, fiefdom. And so the real question here is, can they see there's enough value in the added market activity that one won't raid another? And so I think it's a hard business model they're trying, but it's the first. Again, it is long-lasting infrastructure in that region from what I've seen. But again, we only have data for a few months so far, so I won't be optimistic until we're kind of 5 or more years in.
That's an interesting one here from Gregory Island on the roughly 100% additional cost for non-equipment costs that you mentioned then. And they're working on a spatial model for a cost-optimal electricity access for the DRC. And the question was, what are the more predictable factors of these additional costs?
Yeah, so when you do the kind of straightforward GIS analysis, you can look at the quality of road. Are you going to have to rent your own truck? Are there regular trucks going? You saw in one case we used a lorry, in the other case we actually had to hire a boat to get it to there. It wasn't because it was on an island, it was that was the easier route. So we do that kind of spatial analysis of costs, but my experience is, if someone decides to hold the equipment in the port of Mombasa for 3 months, they're effectively extracting rent. That those are the unknown costs. So
which become more and more known over time, or to be expected.
And painful, so.
Unfortunately, yeah. Talking about cost, the cost of energy that people pay for using the box. I think the reference here is made to your box model, and whether it offers services for 20 years.
Well, I would like to answer that, but we don't have any off-grid boxes that have been in place for more than 3 years. So I can't talk about will they last. That's their hope for lifetime, because these systems, if it was just solar, I'd be pretty confident. But you saw inside the boxes, most of the infrastructure is devoted to purifying water. And water-based systems are notorious for leaking and needing higher levels of maintenance. Now, those are not very expensive repairs, but I will be shocked if we don't need major hardware overhauls for the water handling, the water purification, the pumps and testing. The solar, I'm much more confident about.
All right, and there's a question on hydrogen in Japan. I'm not sure who of you is better posed to answer that. I know we have in the audience actually people from Japan, but for the sake of time, I'm not sure, Bernd, Daniel, who wants to talk on hydrogen.
So I'm not seeing the hydrogen question in the chat.
It's from AKM Assad in 2020, the world's largest hydrogen plant. It's not in the chat, in the Q&A. The largest hydrogen plant.
Yeah.
And Green Energy Center opened in Japan, the Fukushima Hydrogen Energy Research Field. I have no clue whatsoever, but
Yeah. So, I mean, so we do a lot of hydrogen work, and Bernd, you might as well, in addition. So right now, I would say the most exciting large-scale projects are really integrating hydrogen production to on and offshore. So the new Danish offshore wind hub is going to be an electricity and a hydrogen hub. New York State in the United States is planning one. China is now planning 6, all in the south. And so integrating and taking advantage of these big offshore wind turbines and hydrogen looks quite exciting. But I don't think anyone can really answer that. And actually, Japan has the longest. Ota City in Japan has been one of the longest hydrogen experiments anywhere in the world. But now we have Humber in the UK that wants to be a full hydrogen industrial center. There's big thinking on this, and we'll see. But Bernd, you might even work more.
We're not doing a lot of work with hydrogen though. But we see a few pop-ups here in our area, and hydrogen is something that grows from the bottom up. But we also have the big studies my colleagues in Denmark have done on the future of hydrogen as one means of many, but as a central implement to create synthetic fuels of the future. So it all depends on other conditions, on what comes first, right? And as long as you do these studies, in the year 2050 or so, it is a politically pushed subject, and there has been one for about 30 or 40 years now. So let's see what's going on. I'm not too optimistic, but slightly more optimistic than 10 years ago.
All right. And with that, I think we have to finish the session. I'm sorry for the audience questions we couldn't answer. I try to be fair and go chronological and not selecting, but we couldn't get quite through. But that happens. I hope we can follow up in the aftermath. We'll distribute the remaining Q&A questions, and maybe you can answer them at your own time, and we will forward them as we have the contact details of all audience. Thank you so much to both of you, and Bernd, by no means, you are the two heavyweights and also two long-term supporters of microenergy systems, of the postgraduate school. We had an event at Berkeley a couple of years ago. We will reveal today where we will have the next event. I think for both of you that will be interesting to see. I'm not saying anything because it's Christian's playground at today in the evening. Thank you again, Dan, for staying up long. Thank you very much, Bernd, for your patience and discussing here the issues with Dan.
Patience is no problem, but I'm sorry for not being able to join more in this very good conference, and I wish you the best of success for the.
Well, you can do. We can do better next year together. So we'll certainly try to do that. Same for you, of course, Dan. Thanks a lot for being on. Thanks a lot for your continued support, and we move on to 2 of the research sessions.